Splatoon's competitive scene asks you a single question. Are you a squid? Or are you a bitch? In all my years of life have I never seen a single game squeeze out of me more blood, sweat, tears, joy, anguish, semen, excitement, and disappointment than Splatoon. It's a game with low stakes but hype levels beyond imaginable, which I think I'd like to credit due to the two-faced nature of the game. On the one hand, you have this cute game about cartoon squids having paintball fights. You can dress them up, find your favorite Super Soaker, and go have fun. And on the other hand, Splatoon is Nintendo's first real attempt at a competitive multiplayer game. Now sure, you have Smash and Mario Kart and Pokemon to an extent, but those are clearly casual multiplayer games that can be taken to a competitive level if you so desire. Nintendo has come a long way since the days of Brawls Online. Splatoon is the first game that was designed from the ground up with competitions in mind, which is the focus of what I'd like to talk about today. I love Splatoon. I love it so much more than any other online game out there in today's market, but the unfortunate truth is that there's a reason why it's not as popular as other shooters out there with their online exposure and esports fame. And it's not just because of its kid-friendly nature. So then where exactly does Nintendo miss their mark? Let's dive in and find out. Before getting too deep into the details, I'd like to preface this by stating my level of experience with the subject. Full disclosure, I'm no pro, not at Splatoon nor in any other shooter. I wouldn't say I'm particularly bad at the game. If I had the time and patience to grind it out, I think I could have met rank X in all game modes by this point. I mean, I managed to do this, so that's gotta speak for something. But that's okay, because the point of this video isn't simply to bitch about how the game works at the highest level of play. I intend to talk about all skill levels here, both big and small. I've started out at the bottom just like everybody else, and I'd like to think I've done my homework well enough to know about the top tier meta to at least briefly make my stance on some subjects, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Judging a game based on how valid it is at being competitive is very subjective. I could make comparisons to other, more successful games that do things that I like way better than Splatoon, but that would just be setting a bar of standards that the game will never be able to reach or surpass. Instead, I'll be examining various aspects about the overall online experience of Splatoon 2, where some things are done very well and many other things aren't, and try to offer constructive criticism as much as possible, occasionally offering examples from other games where applicable, which implement a mechanic in a more preferable way. Again, I'm not a game designer. I'm aware that many mechanics in the game are made to appeal to a wide audience, and that some aspects of the game can simply be attributed to how Nintendo likes to approach a problem in their own unique way. However, this video is intended to show how I perceive the game from my own point of view, and what I particularly want to see improve from the game, for better or worse. You may not agree with everything I'm about to present, but yada yada yada, that's okay, make your own opinion, you get the idea. So take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, though I shouldn't need to say that since there's a lot of salt in the game already. Am I right, gamers? I'll be observing four major aspects about the competitive experience of Splatoon. The game balance, the ability of players to work as a team, the various game modes and map rotation, as well as the hardware of the Switch and the game's moderation combined into one key topic. So let's jump right in immediately and start talking about the game's balancing, as it's going to be the biggest subject of this video. Unfortunately, I will have to date this video, as Splatoon is constantly being updated and patched with balance changes and new features being added into the game. The research for this video is set to patch version 3.2.1 of Splatoon 2, released on July 27th, 2018, as well as the weapon set released on August 1st. I don't think it will be a major factor for my assessment of the game or its balancing, as most complaints will be based on things that have persisted since the game's beginning, but there is always the possibility of a major update happening at any point, and in all honesty, the goal of this review is to address changes that need to happen, so I hope this video becomes outdated. The only thing I think I should mention at this point is that while the Bombalomber, the bathtub feels strong right now, I get the feeling that it's going to be one of those weapons that's only good at lower levels of play, and the more experienced people will learn how to deal with it over time.
Do you like your new toy? Alright.
Nintendo's approach to balancing the weapons in Splatoon is analogous to throwing a splat bomb into the open and hoping for shit to just work itself out. They are desperately afraid of making big changes to weapons in fear of making something absurdly overpowered or underpowered at either end of the skill spectrum, when in reality, there are still many weapons that are both overpowered and underpowered at various ends of the skill spectrum. The simple excuse being that if a weapon isn't overused at the highest skill tier, then it doesn't need to be addressed. If a weapon isn't seeing less than 1% use across all game modes, then it's not weak. And if a weapon is seeing too much use specifically by pros, then just slap on 10 points for its special and call it a day. But those small changes still don't stop pros from primarily using shooters and mid to long range blasters, with only occasionally slotting in a roller or a charger for one team member depending on the map. But that speaks more on to how Splatoon is designed to be played. No matter the game, you're not going to see perfect balance, and for what they're attempting to do with their higher skill tier, Nintendo are doing decently. But on the other hand, it feels like they're ignoring the larger chunk of their user base. In any other competitive shooter, if a weapon or class saw this much usage, it would get hit with a nerf faster than I throw my controller when my teammate disconnects for the 4th goddamn time in a— There are a lot of weapons with a very low skill requirement that can result in very big plays, so long as you don't dive headfirst into a weapon that directly counters you. If you can get the jump on your opponent, you're almost always guaranteed a kill, just as long as you don't miss your target, leading to a favored playstyle of low-range, fast time-to-kill weapons with little aim requirements. Buckets, brushes, rollers, some shooters, and blasters all fall into this category. Even to this day, I groan at the sight of Octobrush users and target them out of spite. The best counter to these weapons, however, isn't simply to have a weapon that outranges them. If they're not getting the jump on you, then they're not doing it right. And it's not like you can just change your weapon mid-game to counter them once they show up, more on that later. Instead, the best way to improve against these strategies and become better overall as a player is to practice more spatial awareness. Cover ambush spots in ink even when you know nobody's around, and never stay in the same place for too long without checking your 6. This still doesn't stop the discouraging feeling you get from getting killed by these kinds of weapons, as when they do get the jump on you, it almost always feels like you had no chance to escape, yet at the end of the day, it's still your fault for dying. While I am glad that these weapons aren't exactly dominating all of the skill tiers, it does seem a little unfair that a low-level player can just jump right in with one of them and start winning in the lower ranks without much skill or strategy, as it can discourage them from improving. On the other hand, there are a lot of weapons that have a large skill requirement, but are, let's just say, less than good. Not being limited to any one weapon class, some notable examples include the Tentombrella, Mini Splatling, E-Liter, Nozzle Nose, Gloogadoolies, the Goo Tuber, the Dynamo Roller, and a lot more. All of these weapons have their clear role and niche, but for all intents and purposes, they are clearly outclassed at a near objective level, simply due to the dominant effective strategy of this game. The most that you'll ever see out of these weapons at a higher skill level is in a map and game mode combination specifically designed to get the best use out of them. And unfortunately, it's not really an easy fix for Nintendo either. Without the willingness to completely rework how some of these weapons operate, the most they can really do is just release an alternate kit which just feels a little better to use, or change minimal quality of life aspects such as the special charge rate, turfing ability, accuracy, etc. I really love the concept of the Tentombrella, but its highest potential use case comes from how many of your teammates are willing to hide behind you, which, as we'll see, is a very difficult thing to achieve. Admittedly, the sub-weapons in this game feel pretty well balanced, with the only exception from my perspective being that some of the intentionally weaker ones like burst bombs, ink mines, and point sensors feel like they have a little bit too high of an ink requirement, considering how frequently you're expected to use them, but this can be mitigated through gear abilities. Then we have the specials, which are for the most part a little underwhelming. This is mostly due to how differently they operate from Splatoon on the Wii U, where the specials were constant game changers. Specials in this game have minimally more effect on the game state than your sub-weapon, and the most use you'll get out of most of them is the instant ink refill that they provide, making the quicker use ones more preferable, with two exceptions being Inkjet, which can provide the ability to one-shot foes on a direct hit, and the Stingray, which can provide cover for teammates and get kills from across the map, both at the cost of making yourself a big, slow-moving target for a few seconds. There isn't really too much else to say on specials other than that they don't feel super incredible to use, they're just simply an extension of your moveset. But that's probably for the better, as otherwise they'd be a constant get-out-of-jail-free panic button, which would lead to unsatisfying deaths that would otherwise feel safe. However, if more powerful specials did exist, they could be given out to lower-tier weapons to balance them out. That's just something to think about. Almost finished on the subject of game balance is the concept of gear in your loadout. Most gear abilities are minimal quality of life changes that you can equip to your character, where the real benefit is styling on your opponent after you dominate them. However, there's a clear distinction that some gear abilities are objectively better than others. You have the ones that are good all of the time, ones that are good sometimes depending on the game mode and your weapon loadout, and the ones that are objectively trash. Somebody please tell me why Cold-Blooded even exists. Generally speaking, gear abilities which have constant and immediate effect are better than those which only apply if you are dead or out of ink, which could do with some reworking. If the abilities that are situational in use are clearly noticeable in their use when they become effective, then the niche does exist, but as it stands now, most of the situational abilities are only seen as band-aids for when you are already dead, when you have already failed at your job. Which begs the question, why is it obscenely time-consuming to finish your gear loadout if it's going to have such a minimal effect on your gameplay? Even if they did have a larger role in your loadout, I still wouldn't understand why it takes so long to grind out. With unlocking weapons, it takes a relatively short amount of time to level up so that the higher skill floor weapons are given to players when they have experience to see their potential. But with gear, there's no skill basis, all of them are just passive effects. The only excuse that I can come up with is that they pad out the game and give the player something to grind for, but in reality, the fact that it affects gameplay at all should justify giving the player more immediate access to it. At the very least, they aren't squeezing money out of the players through microtransactions. Not yet anyway, we'll see how that one turns out. Lastly to say, it's clear that the goal of the game balance in Splatoon favors selfish, carry-centric playstyles. There's a reason why the standard splatter shot, end parries, and end zap are constantly at the top of the leaderboards. When I go into the hardware, I'll explain that the game itself favors quick kill weapons at a very mechanical level, leading to the solo slayer playstyle being so dominant at all levels, and why the low skill floor weapons are so obnoxious at the lower levels. This shit isn't Dark Souls. There's little punishment in the game on the individual for dying, only on your team for getting wiped, and consequently there's little incentive to improve, have patience, or help out your team. Your deaths aren't tracked at the end of a match, and it certainly feels good to see a high kill count, even when you lose. It just gives you the excuse to blame everyone else for not keeping up with your pace. Why not just play high risk, high reward and kill everyone, putting them on constant respawn, instead of creating map control or helping out your teammates? Which brings me to my next subject. There is little to no semblance of teamwork in this team-based shooter. It is quite laughable if I'm speaking honestly here. You do fight in 2 groups of 4, but aside from that, it is every squid for themselves. And trust me, this segment isn't going to be me complaining about the lack of voice chat in the game, though for the record, it would be an effective solution to many of the problems that I'll present. But Nintendo have clearly gone on record stating that they do not want strangers swearing at each other in their kid-friendly game. That's fine, but you still let people post weird shit like this, so sometimes I wonder. The problem is that there's no alternative presented. There isn't just no voice chat option, but there's no communication, period. No ability to plan, strategize, or adapt to threats with your teammates unless you make an effort outside of the game's functions to talk with your teammates. Many games offer alternative communication models when voice chat or text logs simply aren't an ideal option. Something as simple as a dialogue wheel can be enough to communicate with your team and make plays, call shots, and request assistance. Splatoon has the very minimalistic version of this with no real function whatsoever. There are 2 buttons used for communication, a generic cheer and this way, which is vague in its own right. This way can mean a lot of things, but what do you want me to do when I get there? Do you want me to use my special or my sub-weapon? Do you want me to shoot bubbles? Do you want me to contest the objective? Do you want me to swim or super jump to you? There's not even an option to say yes or no. While dialogue wheels can be cumbersome and unintuitive, Nintendo doesn't even try. Since we can take out Booyah as it serves no functional purpose, there's a whole 7 buttons on the controller that have no function whatsoever in any game mode. Any of these buttons could have been used to map a few customizable dialogue options, open up a wheel, or have other uses. It would have gone miles to have a few options to call out to teammates for things such as retreat, use your special now, contest the objective, protect me or use a shield here, spread out, I've spotted the enemy. Oh no, wait, incoming! Come on, Nintendo, these jokes write themselves! Now you might be thinking to yourself, if you don't like the lack of communication, why don't you team up with friends and play in League mode? Well, joke's on you, I don't have any friends! Seriously though, the reason why I don't like this argument is that it relies on the ability of the player to use resources outside of what the game provides to you. While I do appreciate the inclusion of League mode in order to play a ranked game with friends, and the ability to use the app to have some form of voice chat, it requires you to already have another player added into your friends list. Many of my personal friends don't even play Splatoon, and most of them who do don't really seem too keen on playing competitively. And sorry to disappoint, I'm not very interested in adding random people to my friends list just for the sake of voice chat. The easiest fix for this would be to allow the player to squad up with random players in League mode before searching for a match. However, that does have its own slew of potential problems. There would be no guarantee that the players you squad up with would be cooperative or even use the voice chat option in the app, so it would in effect be no different than solo ranked. I honestly think that just giving more options to the player in the solo ranked mode would be the easiest and most effective fix. No, not every player will use these tools to their advantage, but the option would be there for those who desire them, without putting any additional pressure on the player to socialize with strangers. But there's a little more to the lacking aspect of team play than just communication. Developing a bit further on what I brought up during game balance, a lot of the more teamwork-oriented weapons are underpowered not just because of their inability to ink, get kills, or their niche function, but because of the commitment put on the player to that playstyle for the entire match. In most team shooters, you have the opportunity to switch weapons or classes in order to adapt to your opponent's strategy and find a counter, but in Splatoon, what you pick is what you get. And it's not like you can see what your teammates are bringing into the fight either. If all 4 of you just so happen to be sniping, well, tough luck, Squid, maybe next time. Matches are designed to start and end very quickly, so unless you're playing with friends, you won't be able to plan accordingly ahead of time, and you won't be able to adapt if your opponents hard counter you. I would like to suggest a potential workaround where you could equip 2 loadouts before a match begins. Upon dying or at your spawn point, you could press the L button, which currently serves no function, to swap between your loadouts, so if one isn't working out or creates an imbalance in your team composition, you have another option. But admittedly, that would have implications on the metagame. I wouldn't expect to see a fix in this regard until at least Splatoon 3, but something to that extent, or maybe a preview of your teammates' loadouts would be something I would like to see one day. As it exists right now, the only level of strategy that you can achieve is on your own loadout and the knowledge of which game mode and maps are currently in the rotation, which brings us to... Alright, this one is going to be a little bit nitpicky. 25-year-old man-child gets angry at a kid's game, what else is new? But why can you only have fun when Nintendo tells you you are allowed to have fun for this amount of time? No other shooter that tries to take itself seriously implements a game mode rotation anywhere close to how Splatoon handles it. Sure, you have randomized maps with game mode specific to those maps in other games, and yes, since every map has variants for all 5 game modes, you should know what kind of battle you're going into beforehand, but why the restriction? Sometimes with ranked games, you do have to deal with the hand that you're dealt, and something I will say Splatoon does well is how every game mode has its own associated rank. But in any other shooter, if I feel like playing Payload, I can hop right into a server and play. I don't have to wait for Tweedledee and Tweedledum over here to tell me what I can and can't do.
Oh. I don't want anything. Can you go? You're making me very uncomfortable. Please leave.
Even Salmon Run is victim to this. While they have improved the shift schedule since the initial release, there's no reason why it shouldn't be available at all times with simply daily rotations. There's no reason why all ranked game modes shouldn't be available at all times with only the map swapping every 2 hours, other than that it's a Nintendo thing to do. The only excuse that I can come up with is that giving multiple game mode options would split the player base and create long wait times for matches. My response being that A, I would gladly wait longer times just to play the game mode that I want, and B, the game's player base is clearly large enough to warrant it. Although having many options on the screen to account for all matchmaking types and all game modes would be very cumbersome, I'm sure there could be a way to streamline it so that every game mode could be available to the player at all times, even if it meant a voting system or some randomization is involved. Maybe they would have to change the loadout system so that you choose your weapon and your set after the game mode in a match is declared, which is something that I already want to facilitate teamwork, so that addresses 2 problems with 1 fix. I sometimes go for weeks without seeing the game mode that I want to play simply because of this awful rotation system, which let me tell you was a bitch to work around to record footage for this video. But without any further complaining, let's talk about the game modes themselves. Alright, there's no easy way to say this, but Splat Zones is the only game mode that is taken seriously at a competitive level. Unless it's at an event sponsored by Nintendo themselves, who obviously want to showcase everything the game has to offer. This is simply because Zones is the most balanced game mode, where every strategy and every weapon type has something to offer despite having a clear metagame surrounding it. You need a strong offense to take control of the point and an equally strong defense in order to keep it. Splatoon's key design statement has always been map control, so it makes sense why the King of the Hill mode is seen as the most competitive one. In tower control, analogous to Payload, player positioning is very predictable, and the low-skill, ambushy weapons that plague lower-level players reign supreme, though it's also where snipers shine the most as well. TC is where all the extremes of offense and defense work the most effectively, and because you need to keep control of the tower for an extended period of time to win, almost all matches end with a timer. Rainmaker, while being one of the most teamwork-oriented game modes of all, is an absolute shit show outside of high-level play, as it requires communication, spatial awareness, shot calling, man advantage, all things which are rare to see in common ranked play. Rainmaker matches can end within seconds, and it's dictated by who gets the first team wipe. A strong offensive push wins matches in this mode, causing it to feel a little bit unbalanced. I would like to make special mention that Rainmaker is the mode where most of the niche, teamwork-oriented weapons like the aforementioned Tentombrella shine the brightest. In an ideal world, where maybe Rainmaker worked on a scoring system instead of just the first goal wins, with map and timer adjustments to balance it out of course, maybe Rainmaker could be another game mode seen in competitive play, where these underused weapons could get their time in the spotlight. Finally, Clam Blitz is easily the most frantic and chaotic of the ranked game modes, and it's easy to see why it isn't taken seriously at a competitive level. While yes, there is some semblance of teamwork and coordination needed to play Clam Blitz at a higher skill tier, it's simply unbalanced with little actual focus on map control or man advantage needed to succeed. It and Rainmaker are as close to Capture the Flag as you'll get in Splatoon, and the comparison makes sense as Capture the Flag is almost always never seen as a competitively viable game mode. Other than the primary ranked game modes, I do want to point out the various other game options provided and their potential merit as competitive game modes. Turf War is Nintendo's flagship game mode for the game, and it's the one most heavily associated with Splatoon by the audience at large. Which begs the question why it is not seen as competitively viable. The answer is simple. It is because Nintendo will not allow you to take this game mode seriously. Turf War is the only game mode that can be played unranked, and it is the only game mode that is only unranked. While Turf War does have its own individual matchmaking system, it does not very much succeed in putting you into a fair fight most of the time. Most of the time, Turf War matches end up with people just dicking around and not playing the game seriously, which you know is fine. Not every option in the game needs a rank or be completely tryhard. The problem I have, however, is that casual play is restricted specifically to this one game mode. There's no way to play Splat Zones, Tower Control, Rainmaker, or Clam Blitz without the looming threat of a rank judging you constantly. There's no way to practice using weapons that you're unfamiliar with in any environment other than Turf War. If I want to finally pull off the band-aid and try to get good at using a charger, why can't I play a casual Tower Control match, where enemies pretty much line themselves up to get shot? Conversely, there's no real way to play Turf War and be taken seriously with a score and rank associated with the performance of your entire team. There's the Freshness meter, which tracks your win and loss rate with Turf War with a specific weapon, but it doesn't have any effect on matchmaking, and then there's Splatfests. Splatfests are quite the enigma. They can be the absolute hypest moments in all of Splatoon, and they're filled to the brim with the hottest of memes. You pick a side, you fight for your queen, and you inevitably cry when Pearl wins for the third fucking time in a row, you piece of shit gremlin, unless you're in Japan, where it's even more one-sided towards Marina. Splatfests exist in a void where Turf War is the only game mode available, but with 3 maps on rotation, and Salmon Run is usually available also. However, each Splatfest will contain a map exclusive to the 24-hour period you can play them in the form of Shifty Station. While it's obvious that Shifty Station is designed to be played casually and in Turf War only, it's a damn shame that they're only available for such a small period of time, especially considering how fun the unique mechanics in some of them are. When the Splatfest period for Splatoon 2 ends, I seriously hope that all of the Shifty Stations become available for free play in some capacity, even if it's only through custom matches. Getting back on track, Splatfests are the only semblance of competence that you can show while playing in Turf War, and it highlights exactly why Turf War is an unranked mode. Turf War matches take advantage of the entire map at all times, and when weapon ranges vary as much as they do in this game, it's hard to tell if what you're doing is actually having an effect.
That's quite big. Impressive. Ooh, that's kind of small. Yikes.
Without constantly checking the map, there's no way of telling if you're in the lead or not. You could be consistently getting kills or turfing the map, but that one guy left alive could be in your base, destroying all of your team's hard work. Turf War matches usually are decided within the last half of the match, but before the last 30 seconds. It takes a considerable amount of time to recover from a disadvantage, but more than likely everything that you do during the first half of the game will be rendered null and void by your enemy's rounds. All in all, the various game modes have their share of problems, but to be completely fair, every competitive shooter faces these kinds of issues when multiple game modes are in the mix. In one game, the de facto territory control maps are seen as a joke, where in another, payload is completely ignored, and heck, King of the Hill is seen as the top tier mode. Just because all of the high-level Japanese streamers only play Splat Zones doesn't mean that you can't take the other game modes seriously. But it's difficult to practice and play the game mode that you want to, considering Nintendo's restrictions on them. Not like any of it matters, since Salmon Run is more fun and would probably be a better use of your time. So then why, Nintendo, do we still only have 4 maps a year after launch? This one's going to be a quick wrap-up of everything else I need to say about the game. Starting with the hardware, the Switch allows you to play Splatoon with 2 control options. The motion controls, and the worst twin-stick aiming I have ever seen in a video game. Like, maybe it's just me, but there's no sensitivity option that works for me here. It's just designed to be ignored in favor of motion controls. At first they were a little awkward to get a hold of, but after clearing the single-player campaigns of each game, the motion controls felt like second nature to me. Admittedly, they feel better than any twin-stick I've ever used in a console shooter, though they don't quite match up to the precision of a keyboard and mouse. I don't think there ever could be a world where a keyboard and mouse Splatoon exists, as it would undoubtedly change the meta, but a man can dream. What I really want to talk about is the online capabilities of the game. Splatoon 2 runs at a 15.75Hz tick rate on a peer-to-peer connection. From what I've gathered, the average latency between players is 140 milliseconds, which, for the record, is pretty bad for an online shooter. I'm not going to bore you with all of the nerd stuff, sometimes even I have to read this stuff back a few times to process what it all means. The long story short is that Splatoon is a relatively laggy game, at least in comparison with other online games that try to take themselves seriously as competitive shooters. The peer-to-peer system means that Nintendo doesn't have to pay for dedicated servers, but this comes at the cost of the player experience. If one person is having a bad connection, then the game is going to favor them instead of the 7 other people when determining what's happening on screen. If you've ever experienced the ancient Japanese art of getting shot at by a dead man, this is why. I can see why Nintendo didn't want to put an advantage on people with faster internet connections, but the workaround that they've provided seems to anger both sides with no rhyme or reason. These connectivity issues also explains why faster kill weapons are so much more preferred in the metagame. Because of the latency, your opponent not only has to deal with their own reaction time, but the time it takes for the game to update player positioning, making ambushing the dominant strategy. The game implements considerably large hitboxes and hurtboxes in order to compensate for this, but it's not the perfect solution. There are times when it looks like a shot that should just fly right past me hits me square in the face, and other times where all the pellets of my umbrella shot just magically curve around my opponent who's in the dead center of my crosshair. Just a quick reminder, by the end of 2018 we will be paying an additional cost to play online, so unless they implement a fix to these systems, we'll be paying Nintendo for objectively bad connections. Lastly to cover, Splatoon 2 has no anti-cheat service in use, and very minimalistic approaches to reporting toxic players or punishing bad behavior. While at this time it's still rare to see, a player can just hack in God mode and instant kills and face no punishment for it. A player can purposely throw the match or disconnect, and the most they'll get is a slap on the wrist, with maybe some rank loss or a timeout. Nintendo is adamant on never permanently banning any player, no matter how damning the crime. You wouldn't want to get any angry calls from soccer moms complaining about their kids not being able to express themselves by placing beacons all over their spawn point. While you can report players for various reasons through the mobile app, I've yet to see a reported case where someone had action taken against them due to this. I might be wrong on this, there's not much documentation as far as I can tell. Maybe there's a hidden shadow ban system in place where players you report are never matched with you again. I'm not sure, but if that's not the case, then it should be. You can have that one for free, Nintendo. However, while the player who disconnects from a match is only mildly annoyed, the teammates of that player are often severely punished. When a player disconnects, the match still goes on, only their team plays at an extreme disadvantage through no fault of their own. Technically, there is a system in place. The less players on your team, the quicker your respawn rate and some other minor stats, but that has never had an effect on a match. If you're playing with a man disadvantage, you are at a straight 90% loss rate. The other team would have to throw very hard in order to lose. Now, if a player disconnects on your team and you lose, you won't lose rank sometimes. Only if the player disconnects within the first 60 seconds of the match. Just... why? It doesn't really matter the length of time, a disadvantage is a disadvantage. It's not like players are suddenly going to disconnect left and right when losing so that their random teammates don't lose any rank. I have a perfect example of this right here on file for you. I was playing a Rainmaker match and my team was off to a very early lead. About 90 seconds in, one of my teammates disconnects. With that loss of manpower, we have no way of stopping the opponents from making their slow push towards our base. At the last possible second into overtime, the enemy makes a strong enough push to gain the lead. I can guarantee you that if our teammate had been there for even 10 more seconds, we would not have lost that match. Yet at the end, I still lose rank. It's one of the most absurd things about this game, and it's constantly frustrating to me, no matter which side I'm on. If my opponent disconnects, yeah, it's a free win, but it doesn't feel earned, and most times my opponents just give up right away. There's no reason why the game shouldn't just end in a stalemate right there. Granted, getting booted out of a match because someone else fucked up would be frustrating, but you know what else is frustrating? Wasting my time with an impossible game for 3 minutes. In most other online team games with a ranking system, matches last longer than Splatoon, so if a player drops out, the game automatically searches for someone to fill in the missing spot. The disconnecting player can be put on timeout or even get banned for an extended period of time from ranked play if the problem persists. Sure, it's frustrating, and I'm not saying accidents don't happen, there should absolutely be some leeway and forgiveness for small, rare offenses, but you just see it too often to think that it's just a coincidence. Seeing a player disconnect is the fucking worst. It's more frustrating than losing rank, it's more frustrating than seeing Pearl win every Splatfest, it's just depressing. It makes absolute sense now why there isn't a good voice chat option when every other form of toxicity just gets swept under the rug like it doesn't exist. Before wrapping up here, I'd like to address a common excuse I see for why Splatoon is in the state that it is. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, Nintendo doesn't care about improving the online experience because it's just a kid's game. Like, really? Really? Are you sure about that? Listen, Nintendo knows that there's a mass appeal to their games, a very wide, round audience. Nintendo are becoming very apt at making games and worlds that appeal to children, but have nuances that can be appreciated by older audiences, whether it be through questionable but confirmed sexual appeal, racial politics, or deep, engaging gameplay. Hey, hang on, is anyone gonna talk about how there was a fucking race war in this game? Like, am I the only one seeing this? Nintendo clearly does care about improving the game, seeing as we are constantly getting updates and changes no matter how small, for free might I add. It may just be that they're still very inexperienced with frequently shifting the game balance and are too afraid of making too large of a push, but hopefully this will be something that will see improvements over time. At the end of the day, Nintendo knows what the fuck they're doing. They got me hooked on the concept, but the game is fun and engaging enough to keep me coming back over 3 years after Splatoon's initial release. A part of me feels a little criminal for pointing out all of these flaws for one of my favorite games of the generation, but the fact that it gets such an emotional response out of me only speaks testament to how much I love continuing to play it. There's still tons of things to enjoy in the game, and I'd love to take the time to talk to you about all of them one day. The Octo expansion is a phenomenal set of content, perhaps one of the best pieces of DLC ever released, and if you like anything about Splatoon, you owe it to yourself to play it. The game is just really fun to play, and it feels good, most of the time at least, despite all the grievances I've expressed in this video. The soundtrack is phenomenal, and the game's just fucking cute. That's a point all on its own. Something that I couldn't fit in earlier is that I really enjoy the fact that there's no real objectively correct way to approach a problem in this game due to the dynamic movement options presented through turfing. Consequently, this means that even outside of engagements or contesting points, there's little to no downtime on the player at all during a match. In fact, it's only seen as a punishment for dying or not turfing correctly. Matches in Splatoon are fast-paced and hectic, and there's always something new to try out or discover. There's also still at least another year of content updates and patches to go for Splatoon 2, so there's still a chance to improve. The point is that Nintendo still has a little bit of a way to go in terms of making a competitive online game. It looks like a competitive game, it even acts like one, but it doesn't always feel like one. They have made massive leaps forward since even Splatoon 1's initial release, and hopefully what I've pointed out becomes addressed in future versions of the game. While I'm not expecting miracles, I wouldn't be surprised if, somewhere down the line, Splatoon releases a game-changing update that fixes some of these issues, and manages to help the game stay fresh. Thanks everyone again for watching the video. I hope you learned something new today. I really want to hear what you have to say about my thoughts on the game, so please feel free to leave a comment. If you want to see more stuff by me, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and follow me on Twitter to see updates on my future projects. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one.